Boom. Okay, we're having a chat with pianist Jonathan Sokasits about his 2017 Albany Records release. It's called Intersections, Character Pieces in the Jazz Idiom. And yeah, the CD has the wonderful repertoire that most of us are familiar with, and then some incredible, wonderful solo piano music by two composers I am not familiar with. Copeland, the four piano blues. Barber, Excursions, the Opus 20, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Dana Wilson, Sound Travels. You're going to tell me about Dana a little later. Christian Berg, Fanfare, Janisonis, The Lighthouse. Gorgeous, beautiful, very serious, very wonderful piano pieces in a jazz idiom, if you will, as per what you said. And again, Dana Wilson's Persona for piano, which is huge. That's a
Hmm.
big piece. And then Richard Rodney Bennett, Excursions for Piano. I don't believe I had heard that before. So I guess just right out of the box, this CD, as you say in your program notes, evolved from, quote, a sabbatical to study jazz as I took my first steps in studying the jazz language. What was that about? When did it happen? And are you okay? Did you come out of it okay? I
Oh
think
yes,
so
it's
from the
a great
CD.
time. I've been interested in jazz since I was an undergrad, but I had some jazz major friends, and when I would start to play with them, I realized that how much there was to know about that, and really didn't devote myself to that. And as I got to my current job and started gigging with some friends who were very active jazz musicians, I wanted to learn more and more. And so when I had a sabbatical opportunity come up, I thought I'm going to study that for the full year, teaching half time and studying and practicing half time for the whole year. And it was a really great experience to do that. At the end of the year, one has to write an extensive report what I did for my year off. And in there, I wrote a line something about I understand the language a lot more, but I still feel like a non-native speaker. But it's was really very informative to do that.
And what was the year? How many years ago was the sabbatical?
That was in the 2013-2014 academic year.
And that was around the time that you then went ahead and made the recording also. In 2014,
So
you recorded these
there
pieces.
were several projects. One of them was to study two major jazz textbooks, and I Skyped some lessons with the author of one of those, who's a friend. And another project was performing this particular program. I played it in and around Nebraska, out in Southern California, out in Michigan, and then to record a CD of that program. And as a side thing that arose from this, I found a lot of pedagogical pieces written in the jazz style by, quote, classical composers. And just 3 weeks ago, I did a solo recital of those pieces. The centerpiece of that was Dana Wilson, who writes Persona and Sound Travels, had written a small piece for my wife after I premiered Persona. He said, "Here's a little gift for Karen." And I said, "This is lovely. This would be great for an advanced high school student. Could you complete a set if I got a commission?" And I asked him for 5 pieces, and he gave me 11. And I
Wonderful.
premiered those in 2014, and they're just marvelous. They're done after the CD was released, but that was another offshoot of that year of studying jazz.
And let's just back up a little bit. I do believe I forgot to properly introduce you, Jonathan Sokasits, sorry,
Yeah.
professor of piano at Hastings College in Nebraska, in Hastings, Nebraska. You know, you teach studio piano, piano literature, pedagogy, chamber music. I may have actually said this. Master of Music and DM at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So those are that's kind of the frame of your training and interest. This CD, as we have just mentioned, evolved out of kind of a sabbatical interest. By the way, I hope it's not getting too noisy. The rush hour traffic is insane, and it's after 6 o'clock, and Santa Barbara is not Manhattan, uh, but it sounds like it sometimes. So, my first question is, we might as well just jump right out of the block here and say, what is your advice to classical musicians about how to approach and kind of grow into and even enjoy, how shall I say, approaching jazz, even understanding it. We're going to talk about that with the Copeland. Uh, Understand how the whole thing works. I mean, how do you ask people to say, okay, sing in the shower, start improvising? What?
I'll tell you what two friends told me. Phil DeGreg recently retired from Cincinnati Conservatory, and he wrote a textbook that I used. We're friends. And when I was thinking about doing this project, I contacted him and Peter Eldridge, who is a classmate in Ithaca, who is part of New York Voices. And I said, I'm thinking of studying jazz. Both of them wrote me back in all caps, listen. And so I started listening to various jazz pianists and jazz singers and saxophonists and just getting that style in your ear. So that's a really good first step. I have bought a lot of books on here's how to play jazz, and both guys said, you know, you're not going to learn that from books. You can buy them. I've got a shelf full of them. Someday I'll read them and work on them. But a lot of it has been listening to people, and then I like this chord, figure it out, play with that, own it, put it into what you're doing. But related to this, doing this program and this CD, I was seeing, well, how do people handle this language and what are parts of the language that I can start to understand, approaching that as a classical musician, but then also with a sense of the feel, I think they say, for jazz by listening to jazz musicians. So that would be my advice, is just to listen to a lot of good jazz pianists and singers. You'll learn an awful lot about time and space and listening to chords, things that I teach to my classical students too.
And it's also about just kind of getting over a fear and loathing, maybe. I don't know. I mean,
Exactly. And, you know, honestly, I'm very comfortable doing free improvisation on the piano. I taught students improvisation. I've done improvisation recitals with some students. I'm very comfortable taking a Bach piece or a Mozart piece and improvising ornaments in the style on the repeats in the minuet. And so just getting to the sense where I feel comfortable with the jazz language and using some of their ornaments and their idioms and, as Phil DeGreg would say, their vocabulary.
yeah, and it is that simple, really. You know, just to I sound like a broken record sometimes, but after all, musicians in the 18th century all improvised. That's the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
point. Mozart, you know, sitting down, all those cadenzas, everything improvised. That's all about
Mm-hmm.
improvisation. The Handel singers, the aria, the second, third, fourth verses were all freshly
When you think
improvised.
of the Bach six-voice Reacher card that he improvised when he
Yeah.
went to this PPE. Okay.
Now here's where I want to kind of it really blew my brains out. You know, the program opens with a couple of, you know, classical slash jazz standards for
Yes.
classical pianists, the Copland, the four jazz pieces, and Barber's. Hang on, let me just go up. I'm losing my train of thought here. Copland, the four piano blues pieces. You know, most everybody's heard these played before. I certainly have over the years.
Mhm.
Barber Excursions, the Opus 20, which was such a wonderful piece. But I will tell you, as I did off camera because I was afraid I was losing my mind, I have never heard, for example, Copland's The Four Piano Blues played in the manner that you played them. And my overall impression, I made notes further down here that we don't need. I'll just summarize the idea. I finally thought, uh, this is sounding like free improvisation, the way you played those four piano blues, and that's exactly what Copland's all about, and that most everybody misses. Tell me a little bit, and also classical musicians, a little bit about
Mhm.
how you came to these epiphanies, really, about the four piano blues and how to play them.
Well, in studying the four piano blues, I look at them and I see we can get tied down or bogged down in counting all the different shifting mixed meters. And this has to be 5/8, this has to be 7/8, this is 8/8. And I took that as he's writing something that's to sound fluid and elastic metrically, and you're to sort of go with the feeling of that. And if you look at how some of them are structured, especially the later ones, and these were written over more than a 20-year span and then collected together, um, the later ones especially do that, where you just have a sense of an organic cell that gets developed by adding on another two or three eighth notes worth of beats. So I took that as like a jazz musician or an improviser would do, where you take an idea and you sort of muse on that and play with that. And also, as I would do in playing some jazz, you sort of listen to the sounds that result in the harmonies and the implications, the dissonance, the resolution, and take more time or less time according to that. So I think that informed how I played those. It was just they're lovely, spacious pieces, and I didn't want to feel in a hurry. So as you're, my one teacher, Mr. Karp, would always say, "Oh, you're creating this at the moment. You're the creator here. So just sort of enjoy that moment and rush through this or listen to that special note or chord.
Well, I can tell you, I'm just thinking of just the third piece, muted and sensuous.
Oh, it's
I'm just,
gorgeous.
well, not only is it gorgeous, I've just never heard it played that way. It's almost as
Oh,
though you were lost in a free improvisation, and we all know it's written down. It's notes on paper, but you
mhm.
interpreted these notes on paper in, I'm sure, exactly the manner that Copeland had in mind, just as though they were free improvisations. Absolutely amazing. Let me go back up here now again. So I did want to talk about Copeland because honestly, I really doubted my. I searched and searched. I thought, were there four other uh, piano blues?
I wish there were. They're
How
so
is this
wonderful.
fun? Okay, Barber Excursions. Let's just have a look. This is another piece that pianists play all the time. I think the
Yes.
Excursions, the Opus 20, but I've never quite heard it heard it the way you play it, and that is called a high compliment. Uh, it's not, for example, I'm just thinking of the first movie, Un poco allegro. It's a boogie woogie,
Yes.
but I've never heard such a sophisticated boogie woogie as the way you interpreted the piece. And others people, classical pianists, kind of go, oh, it's a boogie woogie. Okay, I'll do the boogie woogie thing, instead of, how shall I say it, calming down, slowing down, really looking at things carefully and trying to understand the idea of sort of written improvisation.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit, in slow blues tempo, another beautiful
Hmm.
segment in Excursions. Tell me about that. And again, have you played it in the past, and then you had an epiphany about playing it henceforth, or anything?
That was a set of pieces that I had not played until I did the sabbatical and this recital and CD project. I had played without intending to. I love his music. The sonata, the ballade, the nocturne, studied parts of the concerto, and my wife had been a singer, and we had done a lot of the songs. And I just love his music, and I found these a little thornier to play than some of the other pieces, but going sort of with the spirit of what they were. The boogie woogie, I liked the drive of that. I liked the humor that first we have the blue note, then we get further afield with a different one, and they get more and more insistent or strident as the piece goes on. But it never loses its playfulness either.
But
And
also,
the
I think it's
slow
about
blues,
it's about falling into. I hope I'm not in trouble yet, but it's about how I mean, maybe the classicists, maybe it's just me, but kind of fall into stereotypes, and that's what amazed me about this CD. There's not a single stereotype. As I just said, the Copeland, I've never heard it played like that before.
hmm.
Likewise, the Samuel Barber
I
boogie.
tried to look at them all
Yeah.
fresh, and especially the blues one. I've heard that played by a lot of students, including high school kids, and I've even taught it to a high school student. Um, and I thought there's a lot of neat stuff in there where he's playing with the blues by chopping a measure out of the progression or taking a beat out at the end of a phrase so that it's always a little bit off balance and improvisatory. And I love the fun that he has with that. And so I tried to take that with that spirit.
You mentioned this. I might as well jump ahead a little bit and let you talk a little bit about chords and structures that are jazz fourths,
Hmm.
sevenths, that sort of thing. Part of it is a foreign language to most people.
Hmm.
On the other hand, what you describe in your notes, which are very informative, I had to sit down and concentrate on the idea of, yes, sure enough, it is about these jazz chords and how you
Hmm.
move in and out of them and so on. Can you give all of us, a lot of professional musicians out there, so it's not like we're dummies, but it's sort of like, give me a little overview about discovering these jazz chords and how to use them and how not to and what they are even. Is that an all wet question, or is it okay?
Oh, that's a great question. The iPad is sitting on a music rack on a piano. I could doodle if you want,
I'm easy.
but I think without even going there, that we all have to remember that we're all sharing the same alphabet. We're all sharing the same notes, and it's how we stack those notes. So, Ravel uses chords with a major seventh on the top of a major chord. We see, diminished scales and diminished chords in Liszt already. Ravel and Debussy and Stravinsky, Hindemith were all fascinated with that new jazz thing in the 19 teens and 20s and started putting it into their music. I think it's in the the G major concerto first movement. He has a little blues lick in there. So people start exploring those chords, and then talking about jazz, in the one text I was studying, you could play a C major chord by stacking all thirds, and that's a very nice way to do that. But a better C major chord is to stack from the bottom up all perfect chords. And I can take that particular chord, the C major chord, it's actually the 5 notes of the C pentatonic scale, skipping a note in between. So E, skip G to A, skip C, skip E to G, skip A to C. I just put a C pentatonic scale in 5 different voicings with this more open, cool, fourth sounding thing.
Yeah.
So you start finding these little pieces of language, you realize they work the same way. When I worked through a bit of Phil DeGreg's book on keyboard harmony, which incidentally was his textbook for class piano for non-piano jazz majors, and they can play all of that. It's an encyclopedia. They are so fussy about voice leading. So if you're going to play a chord, you're going to move by the closest position to the most logical note. You're not going to jump around. And so we share so much in the language that's in common, the sense of dissonance and resolution, the sense of good voice leading, tasteful use of chords, leave out this note as in clashing with the melody or put it in because it is clashing. So a lot of harmony we know. And if we play any Ravel, we play any Rachmaninoff. I met Christian Berg in the dining hall at Blue Lake one summer. We were there early, Sunday night. I'd arrived early, and I was practicing a Rachmaninoff transcript. And the second last chord of the Tchaikovsky Lullaby, and this guy sitting over in the corner looks up, wow, that's jazz. It was Chris Berg. And I've just read the piece here, looking out at the woods. The piece became Fanfare, which I recorded. But he said, would you mind reading this piece that I just wrote? Oh, and I fell in love with that, and we've been friends ever since. But
well, let's go. Let's
that chord,
sorry.
which has a sharp 9 and a 13 and all of that stuff.
So in other words, it's all there, and it's just
the
a
language
matter of noting it.
people are using that, whether they're classical or jazz musicians.
And let's just go there. You've mentioned these composers. You have programmed 2 wonderful pieces by American composer Dana Wilson, Sound Travels and Persona. You mentioned Persona a little earlier. That's a tough one. That's
yes,
very interesting. And how did you? Let's start there, and then we'll look at. This is so interesting. Christian Berg is a bassist, as you know.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned somewhere where the left hand kind of, the finger
in the one
hand.
Lighthouse, the melody is
Lighthouse,
featured in the bass part.
So let's just get started. Tell me about how you met Dana Wilson, and we'll maybe touch on a little bit Sound Travels and Persona, and then we'll have a look at Christian Berg's piece.
When I was a sophomore at Ithaca College, my theory 3 and 4 teacher and sight singing 3 teacher was Dana Wilson. And he was a cool, hip, young theory teacher that could be seen on Sunday nights playing in a jazz trio. He's a jazz pianist up the hill at College Town over toward Cornell University. I was at Ithaca, the other hill in Ithaca. And he was a teacher that not only encouraged you to study classical music, but he brought a lot of world music into the classroom. And he would say, okay, for your ear training, what are you listening to? Why don't you transcribe that? And I thought, oh yeah, here's some Frank Zappa. And he said, cool. You like Frank Zappa? I was very much into rock and roll at the time, and especially good rock and roll like Frank Zappa or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, more sophisticated stuff. So Dana was my theory teacher my sophomore year, and years later, I was putting together a program, I think in 2007, and it was similar to what I ended up doing for this recording, some different things, more Gershwin and things. But I wrote to Dana and I said, you're a pianist at heart. That's who your instrument was. Do you have anything for piano? Because I know you use jazz style in what you write. And he said, actually, I just wrote Sound Travels. Someone out in California has the rights to the premiere. You may play it after this date. Here it is. And I love the piece. It's just terrific stuff. And I was on the board for Nebraska Music Teachers Association as secretary around that time. Each year we commissioned a composer to write something for us to premiere at our state conference. And I talked to the rest of the board and I said, how about Dana Wilson? Sure. Tell me about him. Well, this and that. And yeah, we know his name from writing a lot for wind ensemble. He's very, very well-established reputation. And I said, could it be for solo piano and could I premiere that? Sure. And then he wrote Persona, and I got to premiere that, and he came out to meet us and hear that. And arising out of that, then I mentioned in our pre-talk that he had written a small piece for my wife, who also had studied in theory class with him. And he said, "Here's a gift for Karen, a two-page piece, this gorgeous thing." And I said, "This would be suitable for advanced high school students, and it teaches the jazz style well. It's not as hard as his other music, but none of his music's that easy." And I persuaded him and got a commission to write me 5 pieces, and he came back with 11 pieces called Constellations, which I premiered in 2014. I love his writing, wonderful music. It has something to say in a unique voice that's very approachable.
Very
And
approachable and also highly intelligent, very well
oh,
organized,
yeah,
magnificent piano writing. Again,
yeah,
this CD Intersections really gave me more than I was expecting because
good.
in terms again of Dana Wilson and also Christian Berg, these pieces don't these pieces they don't fit in a they can't be put into a nice neat little letterbox. Oh, these are jazz
Hmm.
pieces and kind of dismissed. They're very serious works for piano, very very complex and interesting, and at the same time, of course, there's that jazz influence that makes them so accessible.
And Chris Berg, I mentioned, is a jazz bass player, also composer, and we are colleagues at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp in the summers. And he was one of the first people to sit down and start teaching me jazz. He'd be playing the bass, he'd walk over, now, no, try this voicing on the piano. He's very nice and patient, but also just so knowledgeable. And when I saw the piece Fanfare, which he had just written that one night I was playing, I read it and I said, "This is gorgeous. You study the perfect fourth in 4 phrases of 4 bars each. You just reinterpret it in such a neat way." And he said, "Well, I used to teach piano lessons to pre-college kids, and a student would come to a lesson was having a problem with a particular musical concept, so I'd write him a piece." And I thought, what kind of person has such a cool teacher that writes such beautiful music? So I just picked 3 of his pieces. There are maybe a dozen or so. I've played 4 or 5 of them.
Let
And
me
when we
just
meet up in the summers, I wrote a new tune and want to read that. Or here's a piece I'm writing for the faculty jazz sextet. Why don't we read it and see what you think? It's always this very engaging music.
So how many
And
years have you been at this summer camp and what is it? Let's give a little plug for the summer camp,
uh,
please.
I'm what we call a lifer. I've been at Blue Lake, I think, 25 years now.
Wow.
And, it's a fine arts camp in the woods in western Michigan. I'd say about 20 minutes in from Lake Michigan and about an hour from Grand Rapids. And it's a fine arts camp where students from around the world come. There are 4 2-week sessions, 2 of them for high school kids and 2 of them for junior high kids. And the kids come a lot from the upper Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, and then from overseas. And the faculty are university professors, orchestral musicians, again, from around the country and around the world. So on any given 2-week period, there are about 1,500 campers there, students that are either there to be piano majors. There are 3 orchestras, 3 bands, a choir. There's a theater program, a ballet program, art
Mm.
program. I don't want to leave anything out, but it's this comprehensive camp where I get to be in the woods in the Michigan, out of the heat of Nebraska, and get to play with some terrific musicians. 2 summers ago, we did the Messiaen Quartet. I've
Wow.
always wanted to play that, and 4 of us had never played it before and put it together in a week and had just a marvelous experience. So I'm
Wow.
it's my home away from home.
And for the kids, don't forget it's party time. Come on now, summer camps. I remember. So yeah.
Next
Little,
question.
we're talking about. Let's not go there, okay? Christian Berg. I just want to finish up about Chris Berg. Uh, Fanfare. I was not expecting what I heard at all.
Hmm.
Okay, the title is not what you might expect. Janizonis, I have a feeling, I think I read somewhere, isn't there, is there anything about Janis Joplin in there someplace or what?
No, it was just a word he made up, I think.
Okay, good. Uh,
And fanfare used to be prelude one or something like that, something
so
nondescript. And
that
then he
explains,
think fanfare
preludish.
is the perfect force that open it and that
Yeah,
inform the harmonies.
yeah.
But Janizonis, I asked her about it once, and I think so. It's just a Latin tune. I made up a name. Uh,
Okay.
And the lighthouse used to be study for so and so. So he would say, "This is peace for Maggie," because it was for his student Maggie. But that wasn't the lighthouse. But he grew up I think near the shore in New Jersey, and I think the lighthouse seemed a good image for
Yeah.
that piece then.
Yeah, and we talked about, we've already touched on this business in your book, the way you talk about the vernacular of the chord structures, uh,
Mhm.
and about how important that really is to kind of begin to have an understanding of how jazz works, to understand
Mhm.
its structures. Um, we haven't really talked yet about the art of improvisation, and I'm not sure whether, because these are all, everything on this CD is all written music, every bit of it, correct?
Every bit of it except Janizonis. Chris Berg says, if you want to take a chorus and improvise on that, I do improvise in the
A
central
little
chorus
bit.
before back.
And I don't know if we're talking it to death, but the idea of how hard was it for you to? I sing brilliantly in the shower. I mean, I improvise terrifically in the shower, but I couldn't stick my clarinet in my face and improvise to save my soul, even
Mhm.
now. Let alone if I wanted to play the damn thing anymore. That's why I became a conductor. I really got tired of the
Right.
clarinet. But how do you feel in terms of your own improvisatory skills after these years? Do you use them often or not so much?
I probably gig about 6 or 8 times a year with either a faculty jazz quartet we have
Mention that.
here, or there are some people that teach at some of the local high schools who are fantastic jazz musicians, and they've invited me along for the ride with either a sextet or a big band. So gradually, as I get used to that, and depending on with whom I'm playing, I'm very, very comfortable with that. In the
How long did
summers,
it take? I mean, just from the beginning, how long did that take? I mean, the first couple of, hey, you get in the car, we're going to go do this, you can watch or you can play. You know what I'm imagining this. How long did it take to finally sit down? And I would be terrified about
well,
improvising with
I'm still
experienced
scared
people.
by it, but I'm less scared by it, and I'm getting more over myself. I found that you don't need to fill up all the time making sounds and noodle, and the times that it's more successful, I'm just sort of listening to the sounds and reacting to a chord instead of I've got to do something now, and I've got to be Bill Evans or Keith Jarrett. I can't be that.
Also, kind of
But
the same issue about meter. Get past the meter, and all of a sudden
yeah,
you know, in this case, get past the me, the worries, the whatever,
right.
and just go with the flow. I guess as corny as that may sound, you know.
And some of the people I credit in there, Mark LaChance, Chris Berg, Eric Koppa, people that I play with, either here or at Blue Lake, are really good because we'll just sit down for 2 hours and then we'll play and I'll say, okay, you took a turn here that if you don't do that or you do this differently, this will be more comfortable. Or have you tried this scale? This will work really well over this
Uh,
progression. So, and then I'll say, well, show me what you mean. And then Phil DeGreg was very big on transcribing someone else's solo. And I said, well, play something. And I play it right back. My ear works well. But I said, that doesn't make sense. He said, well, copy what the great people do and then borrow a little bit to that and make them your own. So working with some of these musicians that I credit in the CD, you just get this sense, Mark Lopez is just terrific jazz trombonist and great colleague, and watching him play, and then they guide you nicely. They're all good people
so
and very friendly about it.
as
And
you
it's
said in
number
the
friends.
yeah, and then what? So that's nice. Yeah, to
Hmm.
have some friends to kind of pat you on the back and say it's
Patient with
okay.
you, and it's not the highest gear place here that you know
Local
people
pub.
don't post anything you do.
Yeah.
So you're comfortable with that. You can try it out here.
And I don't know why I had something about Richard Rodney Bennett. You have that wonderful. Let me see what. Well, Richard Rodney Bennett's Excursions.
Yes.
What an incredible piece! I keep thinking that I must have heard it at some point, but maybe not. I don't know. But I had no idea that silly me, I should know better, but that he immigrated to the U.S. in the 70s and as you said in your notes, was just blossomed as a jazz pianist. I mean,
Hmm.
Richard Rodney Bennett and jazz just had never connected for me.
And I wrote about how he was studying. He was the first pupil accepted by Boulez and the first person to play Boulez's first sonata in England. He played a lot of very modern music and wrote serial music. And then the excursions that I play use some serial techniques with inversion and retrograde, and even the use of the sort of TV centers selected that work with the themes, and yet they're very jazzy. I'll direct you to go check out a CD that he recorded, I Never Went Away, where he plays and he sings
Oh,
jazz, some of his own compositions,
wow.
some jazz standards, and there's this very genteel, debonair, beautiful tone, beautiful color, tasteful improvisation, but he's just playing and singing. And that all came about when he was accompanying some of these famous singers in the New York scene. They would need a costume change. Well, you just go ahead and do something while they change. He would play and sing. And
Uh,
when I mention his name, when I do workshops or presentations, I'll say, "Well, who knows the name Richard Rodney Bennett?" Very few people do. I said, "Have you heard his music?" No. I said, "Well, you've seen Four Weddings and a Funeral. He wrote the film score to that and 50 other movies you've
yeah,
probably seen, and gorgeous music."
yes.
And this was a side, I found these pieces when I was doing the program in 2007. I was thinking about the Barber Excursion. I said, Rodney Bennett wrote excursions. I play a two piano piece of his, which has a samba triste and a ragtime waltz and a country blues and a driving hard rock last movement for two pianos. It's great fun. And I thought, these are going to be good. And they were. And they're a wonderful challenge, but just he knows jazz very well and yet very sophisticated writing for the piano.
Yeah, and I had just really Richard Rodney Bennett. I just think film.
Right.
That's about as far as it goes for me.
Mm-hmm.
So this also has been a revelation. It's wonderful, wonderful excursions. You really get a chance to hear the art of Richard Rodney Bennett as a
Yes.
composer in an intimate setting. I guess we'd better wind it down. We're at about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Jonathan Sokasits, got it.
Nailed it.
We have been talking about his 2017 release, Albany Records release, Intersections, indeed. Intersections, character pieces, that's for sure, in the jazz idiom. It's a beautiful, beautiful CD. Your choice of composers and music is just really exquisite. Copland, four piano blues, Barber, Excursions, these are the pieces people know. And then these wonderful composers, Dana Wilson, Sound Travels, Christian Berg, Fanfare, Janice Onis, The Lighthouse, and then this really big piece, Dana Wilson's Persona for piano, and then Richard Rodney Bennett's really surprising and marvelous excursions for piano. All of this stuff, our video interview, my review of the CD, all of this stuff is going to, my review will come a little later. I'm behind on reviews, but I'm going to get the video interview up, all of this up at performingartsreview.net with links, to your website, to everything I can think of. And we'll have some performance. I think you got some performance videos also that we can put up.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do all of that, and I guess you have to thank the gods for that moment when you decided, I think I'll take a sabbatical and learn a little bit about jazz. It's wonderful, and your playing is fabulous. And as I told you, your interpretations. I will never be able to hear the Copland again in what I now would call a standard misinterpretation of how to play them, having heard your interpretation of the four
Oh,
piano
thanks.
blues. Jonathan Sokasits, thanks very much for giving me some time there
Thank you also.
where are you? In Nebraska? In Hastings, at Hastings College in
Right.
Nebraska.
South Central Nebraska.
South
Mm-hmm.
Central Nebraska, and it's warming up apparently, we think. Then again, the ice age could happen tomorrow. Who knows what's going on with
Yes.
the climate? Jonathan, thanks a lot for giving me some time
Thank you very
tonight.
much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Right.